Kelly is
loves to read.
It should be upstairs there, so then.
She loves to read.
Okay. All right. Welcome, everyone, to Brave New Worlds, presented by Bywater Books and the Publishing Triangle. Thank you for coming out on this cold and rainy day when you could be protesting outside in the cold and the rain. You made a good choice. My name is Greg Newton. I am the co-founder, along with my partner, Donald Jokum, of the Bureau of General Services Queer Division. Thank you very much. We're being helped out by our volunteer, Mikey Friedman, today. And the Bureau is an all-volunteer independent queer bookstore that we founded in 2012 and that has been here at the LGBT Community Center since 2014. We have regular business hours Wednesdays through Sundays from 1 to 7 p.m. And we often stay open later for events. And on weekends, we like a nice afternoon event. So here we are. As an all-volunteer bookstore, we are dependent on donations and sales to keep this project afloat. So I'm going to pass a bag around. We especially encourage folks to make a donation if you know you won't be buying books, but you're certainly welcome to do both. There's some change in the bag, and there is a QR code if you'd like to give through Venmo, and anyone watching online, if you'd like to make a donation through Venmo, can do that at BGSQD.
Do you accept Exxon?
Exxon.
No petroleum, no weapons.
Really? How things have changed. No lubricants of any kind.
Lubricants are fine.
Oh, I see.
If you're not already on our email list and you would like to be, you can sign up for that at the back of the room, and you'll get an email every other Monday about our upcoming events. And we are in full busy season right now, so we have tons of events, many with the Publishing Triangle. We host a monthly reading. Well, technically, this is our April Outspoken, isn't it?
Yes, sure. We plan to be.
Sure, it's official. So we host the Publishing Triangle for the Outspoken series, a monthly reading series that we have been doing with them for over a year. But we'll also be hosting on April 16th, I believe, the finalists, or some of the finalists for Publishing Triangle Awards. So that'll be on the day before the awards are given. So a moment of intense suspense. Should be really great. We have quite a few readers. All right, so before we get started, I wanted to read a land acknowledgement. And the Bureau acknowledges that our organization operates on the unceded land of the Munsee Lenape. We encourage you to make a monthly donation to the American Indian Community Houses Mannahatta Fund. The Mannahatta Fund, according to its website, is an invitation to all settlers and non-native people who wish to acknowledge the legacy of theft and genocide that comprise the history of New York City and the United States. The Bureau also recognizes Palestinian liberation as a queer issue, and we encourage you to read our flyer on why we feel that it is important for queer people to speak out in solidarity with Palestinians. And that flyer is in the corner. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce Carol Rosenfeld of the Bureau. You're now on staff, Carol! Of the Publishing Triangle. Please give her a warm welcome.
As I was coming in today, I suddenly realized that I had forgotten to prepare bios for all the panels. So I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. I'm going to start with Cheryl.
There are no bios. Hello, I'm Angela Bassett. Just makes a better. I've been writing fiction for about now 10, 12 years. My first book was published with Bywater Books. I'd written a self-published book, the first of the Charlie Mack Motown Mysteries, and I was at a reading event in Salem, came up to me and said, "I liked your book." She saw it online. She said, "You think Charlie could be a lesbian?" And I said,
We hope the best for
"Yeah."
people.
And I went back to my beta readers and they all said, "We already thought she was a lesbian." So that was an easy fix. Thank you guys for coming out. I've written 6 books of the Charlie Mack Motown Mysteries. Thank you. Got a couple of Lambda nominations, an Anthony Award nomination for that. Last year I wrote a non-LGBTQ book based on a true story in my family called Times Undoing. It's called about the murder of a black man in Birmingham, Alabama in 1929 by the police. And that was my first book, not published by Bywater, but I'm writing another Charlie, and so who knows, I might be coming back.
That was it.
Yeah, that was it. That was right.
My name is not Angela Bassett. Early on with my very first book, I understood that.
Well, what is your name?
Who let her in? I mean, seriously, Gotham back there. No, I mean, I was told that when you write fiction, you create the world and invite the people in. So I decided to call myself Anne McMahon, famous author.
No, okay.
And since that time, I have sold literally tens of books. Tens. I tend to write kind of across the spectrum. I write, I write romances, I write general fiction, and I've written a couple of mysteries. I've won a couple of Lammies and some other stuff, but the thing I really want, the Pillsbury Bake Off, still eludes me. But I've been with Bywater Books now for, I don't know, I'd have to cut off my leg and count the rings. Anyway, I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm thrilled especially that we're all together today to talk about a topic that, deeply concerns us and all of you, so there you go. Now, here's someone with real talent.
Aww. Hi. I'm Samara Brieger. I'm a writer. I wrote a couple books. The most recent one is called A Long Time Dead, and it's about vampires. And the one before that is called Walk Between Worlds, and it's about people in a fantasy situation. I say I write books about women in improbable situations falling in love, and that might change eventually, but I only have 2 books, so who's to say?
Very good business.
I'm writing. I am unawarded, but I delight in the craft itself. And
That's a good line. That's a good line.
Although-
I'm gonna see that in a book somewhere.
yeah, exactly.
Although if I can butt in, I don't think that being regarded as the author of the best romance of the year by the New York Times is less than. So,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you too.
Yeah, I need to.
is this one dead?
And that's it for me. Yay!
How do we get Anna to introduce herself?
Yeah,
Oh,
Anna.
that's right, Anna.
Anna, Kraken.
Kraken, I'm here. What's Kraken? Sorry. So I'm so sorry I couldn't. Are you able to hear me?
Yeah. Oh yeah, loud and clear.
So sorry I wasn't able to be there today. I am a little bit sick, but I'm Anna Burke. I write across a variety of genres. I've got a contemporary romance series called the Seal Cove series about some veterinarians. I've written a couple fairy tale retellings, and recently, my most recent book is In the Roses of Pieria, and it's also about vampires, and there's a funny story behind it. Yeah, that's it. That's all you need.
Anna lives to teach us all that it is possible to write a romance with footnotes.
And Anna and I, when Anna came to me and said, "Do you want to write a vampire novella?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Come on." And I said, "Okay." And then
That's easy.
And she came back to me and she said, I think my vampire novella is a full novel. Could you make yours a full novel? Because our intention was to, release an anthology of these short vampire stories. And I said, no. And then she said, come on. And so I did it. And
Well, you're easy.
I'm easy. That's how I want to be known. Easy.
You might be cheap, but you're not free.
Well, I just want to interject about vampire novels. So I've been reading Anna's book, In the Roses of Pyria, and also I will say, first of all, I have a real weakness for books that have letters in them. It's just, I love
You mean
them.
like alphabet? Or-
No. You know what I mean?
Epistia.
You're so-and-so, and also footnotes. I am a sucker for footnotes. So I was talking to a copy editor, a Bywater copy editor, Elizabeth Anderson, about Anna, about the books I was reading. And she was talking about Anna's book, and she said, oh, I didn't even know it was about vampires until like 3/4 of the way through. And I was like, it's about vampires? But see, I was in the early stages of it. But then I started kind of looking at things and I thought, it's like Anna's leaving me breadcrumbs. And I'm following them through the forest and like eventually I'm gonna realize like, oh wow, now I know what's going on. So I wanna compliment you for doing that. Because see, when I first got into the book, I was like, I didn't know it was about vampires. Not that I wouldn't have read it because I like to read all your work and I read Samara's work and I loved it, but I also am wondering now, what is it with lesbians and vampires? And does anybody have a response to that?
You do.
It's the net.
Don't ask me.
I have a lot of thoughts about this.
Oh, good.
Yes, you do.
So historically, right, the sexuality of women was always seen as, not always, and I'm talking about like, in the time when a lot of these early vampire novels, Carmilla and Dracula were written, it was the Victorian era and an era of women's sexual suppression in a way, and women's hunger and women's bloodlust and women's sexuality are all, tied together, and this taboo predatory woman is something that is maybe frightening for some audiences and enticing for us. And I think that really draws us in, and we like a transgressive, aggressive woman.
You were
Anybody
just
else?
gonna say it's about the sucking, weren't you?
I'm so transparent.
Well, okay, so, one of the things that I was thinking about in this panel is how addressing kind of important topics in our literature. And so one of the, in terms of Cheryl, because in your Charlie Mack series, one of the books that I went back to was the one where Charlie is trying to find out who's killing homeless people. And so she actually becomes a member of the homeless community. And I thought, I wanted you to talk a little bit about that. And also I know that in that series, Charlie's mother is in the early stages of Alzheimer's. And I think that's also another important thing to deal with in literature, because it's so prevalent in the society and probably not addressed as much as it should be.
Well, I think writers get their ideas from lots of different places. I get mine a lot from the work I've done in the past, the travel I've done, NPR. NPR is a constant source of inspiration and story ideas for me. The homeless book, however, I've been thinking about writing about homeless people for a long time. I've worked with a guy at public radio in Detroit, and he told me that one time he went undercover as a homeless person, and I said, why? And he said, I just want to see what it would be like. And he talked about the ability to be almost invisible, to be able to move to places where people didn't notice you or didn't care to notice you. And he talked about some of the things he'd seen, and I was really, had been fascinating with the idea of that for decades. So I wanted to think about the life of homeless folks, why they choose that life, why some of them choose to stay in that life. I had a social worker friend who took me to several homeless shelters, and I talked to homeless people about it, and I was fascinated by that idea. The Alzheimer's character, the mother of Charlie, who has early onset Alzheimer's, came from my work in the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. I funded a grant for a program called The Unforgiven, a documentary about the tens of millions of caregivers of people with Alzheimer's. There are like six or seven at the time Alzheimer patients and 30 million Alzheimer caregivers. And I thought, well, I want to write about what that must be like. And so I wanted Charlie's mom to have that characteristic. I remember, however, my editor, Faye Jacobs, who edits my books and some of your books, I think, said to me in book 5, I've written 6 Charlie books, can Ernestine still do that stuff? And so I've got to, in the next Charlie book, really grapple with Ernestine and her demise, which is why I think I've been putting off writing the sixth book.
Well, I'm sorry. No, I was just gonna comment on the fact that it's I'm so sorry, thank you. It's particularly relevant now since we've really become a nation of caregivers. You know, how many of us here are caring for, a relative who's living with something, majority of us. And I think that's only gonna become more pronounced as time goes by, as we age, certainly I do.
I agree. And the other thing, and I also now, with regard to Anne, I wanted to bring up, 2 of your books. One is Galileo, which kind of deals with with the abuse within the Catholic Church. And you have a character in that book and the previous one, who's a priest.
Mhm.
And what really struck me, was his grief. Not just anger, because that made a lot of sense, but the fact that he had this enormous grief, for not just for the victims, but for his beliefs in a
his
way,
church.
and stuff like that. And I wonder what made you go in that direction. Oh, you got.
Will you help me dress later too?
You look
Honest,
fantastic.
I didn't bring a lint brush.
Oh.
Well, like in my case, you're talking about Father Tim, who actually is the main character, Evan Reed, who is the kind of, she's not a private investigator, but she's what in politics is called a dustbuster. So she's the person a political campaign hires to get dirt on an opponent, or at least she could work for the party that's running the candidate, so they know everything there is to know, anything that might potentially come out. So that's how she becomes involved in this, because there is a kind of ultra-conservative nominee to the Supreme Court, and they have next to no time to vet this guy.
Oh, that would never happen.
That would, same circumstances. They put this guy up 2 weeks before Christmas. He's already a circuit judge. They think everything there is to know about him is known. And they're kind of going to her as a last resort to see if there's anything they can use to derail it. Well, boy, does she find it. And she finds it through this connection to the sort of ritualized abuse of boys in the Catholic diocese in Philadelphia. So I did have a train of thought here. Where was I? The reason that I picked that, Father Tim himself grew up in that parish and experienced some of the same thing as a young man. But he was able to get himself out of it. He told his parents, they got him, off the basketball team and into something else. So he grew up carrying this incredible load of guilt because Tim did what all of us, I include myself, who are victims of childhood sexual abuse, what we all do, we don't tell anyone. It's a conspiracy of silence. So that's what Tim is dealing with when all of this comes to bear, because his faith is genuine and he loves the church and he feels complicit with what the church allowed to happen and how everyone looked the other way. So that's why it mattered so much to me, because it gave me a way to write through him about my own experience growing up and having to come to terms with that in my family, which made me hugely unpopular, as I'm sure you can imagine, and still does to this day. Does that answer you?
Yes, it does. But I have another question for you
For me?
about another book. In Dead Letters from Paradise,
Yeah.
which again is letters, right? But in this case, we don't really, the person who's receiving the letters has no idea who's sending them.
Correct.
But it's set, you know, the woman who is the main character and who's receiving the letters is kind of, her life is very, I want to call it static in a way, you know, and then all these things start to happen. And she's living in the South during the time of the lunch
Counter sit-in.
counter sit-ins.
That's correct.
And so that begins, you know, to affect her. And also she meets two lesbians that I think she does not know are lesbians at first. And, you know, this whole thing kind of expands. So it's, to me, it was like really seeing a person transform through what's going on in society and also, you know, really a lot of what's going on in society. So is that, you know, want to talk about that a little?
Yeah, part of it is my love for the, sort of my love-hate relationship with the town where I live in North Carolina called Winston-Salem, which was founded by Moravians in the 17th century. And there is an authentic Moravian community called Old Salem that was the original settlement. And the Moravians were, you know, lovely people with very solid values. However, they also were slave owners. Somehow they managed to reconcile that. And even after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, these God-fearing good people concealed that information from the slaves they owned, did not tell them. And they did not, the people the black people who lived and worked in that community and who were held as slaves were completely unaware that this had happened until one day a Union officer rode into the community, went into the church and strode up to the pulpit and told everyone what President Lincoln had done, which was, you know, set these people free. So Esther is a woman who has grown up in that and basically has lived her entire life in a snow globe. And she works as a postal investigator for the USPS. And her job is to resolve dead letters. When things come in that cannot be delivered, it's her job to figure out where they go and, you know, where they should belong. So it's through the mystery, it's kind of a cozy mystery that she ends up becoming involved in solving that causes her to step out of her little, you know, her little snow globe. And that's how she becomes involved in the lunch counter sit-in movement. Things that, and the black woman with whom she has worked in the basement of the post office for 20 years, Esther has never given a thought to the fact that they can't go to a restaurant together for lunch. Never thought about it. You know, or when a man who is working on the house of neighbors of hers is badly injured, he can't go to the White Hospital. The ambulance won't pick him up. They have to drive him all the way across town. All of those things begin to just open up and unfurl before her. So that's kind of what that book is.
So, I mean, where do we all get our ideas? That's pretty
Drugs.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm neglecting Anna.
Yeah.
Anna, do you want to chime in here on some stuff?
Oh gosh. What stuff specifically?
Climate. You wrote about climate.
Yeah, that's right.
Like compass. Oh my God.
Yeah, so yes, my first book is called Compass Rose, and I pitch it as either Waterworld but gay or dystopian lesbians on the high seas. And but at the time that I wrote it, I still was thinking maybe we'll get our act together as a species and communities, and I essentially wrote it on a worst case scenario. I have yet to finish the third book, although I am working on it, because that research is getting really painful, because I don't think that we're going to get our act together in time, and we might be able to do something. We might be able to mitigate it. Obviously, hope is super important. Things could happen, But if we don't, millions of people are going to die. And so I've got that hanging over me as I'm writing this book. And I'm trying to find a way to acknowledge that while still offering some hope to the reader, because nothing, promotes inaction like despair. Yeah, so it's been fun. The first two.
Didn't Anne also write about pirates?
I think that is the book about.
That's the
What
pirates.
about the fairy tales that you did, like Thorn and Nottingham, where you really put a twist on those? Like, what was it that motivated you, to take those kind of iconic narratives?
I've always loved fairy tales. And I, growing up, read a lot of fairy tale retellings. And at that time, I mean, we're in this golden age of sapphic literature now, but at the time, there was nothing that, at least that I could find. And so I always, in my mind was kind of rewriting the narrative. And eventually I was actually at like an elementary or middle school teacher had us make these time capsules. And so for a while, after college, I did this will circle back, I promise, unless I forget my train of thought, which is also very likely. But I had written to myself in this little time capsule, like, you should write stories for people like us. And so when I read that, I hadn't been writing for a little bit because I was right out of college. I was experimenting with other stuff, not drugs. And I found this note and I was like, maybe I should give it a try. So in a lot of ways, I think I credit fairy tales as the thing that made me try to take my writing more seriously. And Nottingham is the first book that I wrote. That first draft will never see the light of day. I think it got to be like 200,000 words and we were like halfway through, and I learned a lot writing that book. One of them is to be a little less prolific. So yeah, it really brought me to where I am today. So yeah, I hold a lot of love for those books, even though of course I wish I could fix half the things in them, right? Isn't that the way?
So let's just think for a minute. While we're talking about climate very briefly, I just want to pitch another Bywater book because it's really great. It's called 2 Degrees. It's by Bev Prescott, and you can go on Bywater's site and you'll find it. It's a really, really great book about climate. And so, if you're interested in reading that kind of literature, I highly recommend it. I'm trying to think,
Samara.
oh, yes,
Hi.
sorry, Cheryl was pointing out,
That you haven't spoken in a while.
Oh,
haven't spoken in a
okay.
while.
That's what
I can
TV
talk
producer
about
Nick-
What are you working on now?
I'll tell you what I'm working on now. Well, you know what? Actually, going back to serious topics, putting serious topics in our book, my book, A Long Time Dead, is a lot about trauma. And I got there because one of the horrors for me of vampiric life and unending life is that you live with everything you've experienced. And trauma, in part, leaves you at the age you were when you experienced it. And that really compelled me, because what happens when you're hundreds of years old and something happened to you when you were 15, 16? And how do you carry it and how does it change? And it really, I didn't intend to write about that, but it forced me to reflect on my own traumas and my own, the things that I'm carrying with me and the narratives that I've created around these events to sort of pad them in my mind. And then it went back to the book and then back to my mind and then back to the book as things do. But yeah, that's my serious topic, I guess.
That's great, actually. I'm really glad you said that. That's a really good point. It makes me want to just think about it for a while.
I have a question.
Oh, good.
For everyone, those of us who are authors, we write books because we have stories that we think are important, that we want to tell, and we have things that we want to talk about or hopefully draw people's attention to. But at the same time, you have to be attentive to what you have to be attentive to that.
Pardon me.
Samara had a couple of chili dogs on the way. No, but I mean, it's kind of like you're always kind of being put into this place where you have to balance the stories that you really want to tell with what you know a publisher is going to be willing to sign and what they think they can sell, you know, in the marketplace. And particularly when we're talking about sapphic fiction, I think many times the audience has real expectations about what they want and require in the books that, you know, a lot of times is at odds with you don't find that to be true? I mean, I'm passing, I find it to be.
It's something I should think about. But I don't, I mean, I've been lucky enough to work with Bywater, who have been very generous with me with what I can put to paper and what they will publish. But I am writing something now, and I have an agent now. I'm going more traditional route, and she has had this book for a while, and I have not heard from her, and I'm a little concerned because I'm very much used to, you know, writing exactly what I want as much as I want, and then I'll work backwards from there in terms of what is marketable and what is more commercial.
I sort of do the opposite. I have a white lady in Iowa in mind when I write my books. Because I'm writing a Black private investigator who's queer, and
Well, that's kind of a full stop right there, isn't it?
yeah, but I think Helen in Iowa doesn't know about what that means. And so I want to present Charlie and her life in a way that this woman can experience queer life and say things like, call her husband Ralph.
Did you know that?
Did you know that?
I had no idea.
They had
The
roast beef
back
like
door.
They had roast
really
beef last night, and we had roast beef.
Different.
So I do have an audience in mind, but sometimes one conceit is sometimes I just do it out of my own curiosity about things. The book 2, which is about the auto show, about a threat against the Detroit auto show, was just my conceit when I heard
And who knew it was a tariff?
That's true. I wondered, I'd always gone to the auto show. Millions of people around the world go to this auto show. And one year, they had the auto show and the Super Bowl in Detroit at the same time. And it was a time when Detroit was going through hard times. And so I thought, man, they must really had a lot at stake. They wouldn't want anything go wrong at that auto show. Why don't I bring some terrorists there? So I just did that out of my own curiosity about playing with that idea. And by the way, that show got a shout out on Jeopardy in February.
Yes, it did.
Woo-hoo!
Yes, it did. Yes. Charlie Mack, that's right.
That's really exciting when that happens.
But that reminds me, if I can quickly shut my ass up.
No,
right?
no.
Oh, thank you. That reminds me, that was precisely what Alfred Hitchcock always did with his films. He would make these absolutely unheard of things happen in the middle of some icon, right?
Yes.
Like in the middle of the UN.
Yeah.
Or
Oh,
on
yeah.
the Statue of Liberty, or
Yeah, that was-
someplace that
yeah.
was sacred to the absolute.
Mount Rushmore.
Yes, somebody hanging off Roosevelt's nose, like, but that's what he did to
Yeah.
sort of shock you into, paying attention.
Yeah. And he said stories in everyday life, like Rear Window in a backyard.
love that
which is one of my
it's
favorite
voyeurism.
ones. Yeah. Or at a,
And you've been arrested
at a-
how many
Oh,
times?
15 or 16.
No convictions.
And in a nondescript, scary looking motel out in the middle of nowhere. We love Hitchcock.
Psycho.
Well, I'm trying to think where to
Kind
go.
of a turn, didn't we?
Where to go from here, but I should have made notes, but I was thinking really about, sorry about this, about people becoming their true selves. And that's kind of what I feel like a lot of these books do. even within the vampire books, it's kind of, that's what's going on. People are becoming the people that they were meant to be, in a way. And that's, I think that's important to write about, because in some ways, I think within the community, I mean, people are always coming out in some way or another, because our lives are not really static, so even, there's always something coming in your life that you have to come out about. And maybe it's not your sexuality, but maybe it's something else. So I think books are very important for that, and that's, one of the reasons why we should read them. Sorry, I'm like,
This reminds
Stacey,
me,
no.
sorry to cut.
That's okay, no, please do.
This really reminds me, I want to get on my romance soapbox. Because what I do when I write a romance is I say, okay, character needs to get from point A to point B. So who is the ideal person who will challenge them, who will give them enough comfort to be able to do something different, who will help move them and push them, and who's, what views does this other person have that will push this first person from point A to point B, and vice versa. And I think, people kind of devalue romance, even though it's, the most commercially valuable genre by a lot. But I think romance is a lot about identity and a lot about becoming somebody that you were meant to be through having another person in your life.
It's a lot about hope. I think that's romance. I can't write romance and I'm scared of it, but I enjoy that it's about.
You're scared of it?
I would
scared of
love
it.
to read a romance by
It's
you.
just, I'm scared of it.
Yeah.
But I think because it shows, it holds hope, and towards the end, there's the happily ever after, and even though it's a trope, it's a very satisfying trope,
But have we moved into, are we moving into an environment now where, can we afford to still have the lion's share of our literature be HEA, trope-driven narratives? I mean, now that we're facing, erasure. I don't know, what do you think, Anna?
Yeah.
No, that's a really interesting point, Anne, and it's something that I've been thinking about in my own work, but also I see it when I teach. A lot of my queer students who are writers, they want to write in a queer normal world, and they all say, "Oh, I'm so tired of reading about suffering," and I think to myself, yeah, but the suffering is important to remember. And a lot of the students who are saying this are very young, and not to discredit the difficulties that they may have faced, but we are currently living in the best time it's ever been to be gay, at least in Western culture, right? Like it's not great, it's not perfect, but we did make some strides, right? And now that we're losing that, I think hope is important, but we also, as writers, we form our ideas through writing, but also as readers, we do have this ability to shape the narrative and to, affect the way that people think. So having hope on one hand, but also, kind of the cold hard fist of reality with a little dash of hope in there would make a nice balance. And so I do hope that we start to see a little bit more of that. Yeah.
You mean like even in romance fiction?
Yeah, and what I think romance is really powerful at doing, I like to think of it as like a pill pocket for your pet. Trying to get them to take a pill and they don't want to do it, so you surround it in this like mushy gushy deliciousness.
Yeah. I'm gonna write a book called Pill Pocket.
So I think romance can tackle some incredibly difficult issues. I've read and loved books, that tackled sexual assault, that tackled, race, that tackled anything that the entire breadth of the human experience, and a lot of that experience is uncomfortable. And there's a great book called Romancing the Beat by Gwen Hayes, and she talks about how her characters need to have this hole in their heart. So they have to go from wholehearted to wholehearted with a W, which I thought was a great way of putting it. And giving your characters trauma is actually really helpful as a writer. It helps create that tension, it helps create that conflict and depth of character. So I actually think that romance can do that incredibly well. And then, there are also, I think we do need to still value the romance books that are light and happy, because, I know for readers who are going through trauma at that moment, they maybe don't want to be reminded of it. They want that hope, that brightness. So I do think that we are seeing a more multifaceted body of romance literature.
I don't think I'm alone in this, but I know that one of the things, and I know Christelle's gonna shoot me evil eyes back there. Turn around, please. One of the things that I've struggled with many of my books that are basically romances, but that have difficult content, is often in the community, the various reviewers who are available to us give the books trigger warnings. Which to me, I certainly don't wanna do anything that's going to re-traumatize, but at the same time, it's kind of like we need to be able to, particularly if I'm writing about something that actually derived from my own experience. Oh, does everyone know what a trigger warning is on a book? That it contains content that certain kinds of readers might find offensive or traumatizing, whatever. And a lot of times what those succeed in doing is getting people just not to buy the book at all. Just that they won't read it at all. Because, they don't want to be, I don't want to read anything that's going to make me, feel icky or oochie or. Yeah, but what I was going to say quickly, for me personally, as the author, as a person who lived through a lot of that, it's like you're telling me that my life needs a trigger warning and you don't want to hear about it. So I struggle with that.
I just think the trigger warning is so silly. I get that younger people maybe have not had adversity, and so they need to be warned you're going to use the N-word, or that there's going to be sexual violence or something. I write crime fiction. Bad things are going to happen in the book. I think if you know it's a mystery and crime fiction, you just have to take that at face value. But isn't that the same excuse people are using now to take out books about Black people and about the Holocaust and about Native American stuff? They don't want Johnny to be upset, to read about there was racism in America. Oh my God.
We can't talk about that.
Yeah, that seems like such,
It's the surest way to repeat it.
it seems like such panty waist excuse. I don't know if that even makes sense. But I just, I think we have to talk about the hard topics now. We are in existential times. We cannot put our heads in the sand. Yes, we have to have some balance with hope, because despair is not good for activism. I get that. And joy helps too. But we have to tell the truth in our writing about how the world is. We have to look back at our history and the truth of our history, the good and the bad. There's lots of bad. Grapple with that, sit in the discomfort of it, and then fucking do better.
I think that the way people engage with my books is none of my business. I think that if people, Storygraph is a great website. That I believe in more than I do Goodreads. And there is a section for people to write content warnings, and what people had a problem with is not what I expected them to have a problem with.
Yeah.
In my book, a lot of rabbits die violently, and I don't give a shit. I thought they'd be more upset about,
It's almost Easter, Samara.
Sorry, I'm Jewish. I genuinely thought they would be more upset about the discussions around abuse. And I think they were more people have come up to me and said, you should really say something about those rabbits.
Here's your opportunity.
Please, if you love rabbits, be careful. I just read a book that really surprised me because it had content warnings written, printed in the book. And it just egged me on. I just wanted to read it more. It was like cannibalism, sure, yeah. I think that audiences are self-selecting. I think that we are in a moment when people do want to challenge themselves. And I think that when you allow someone a modicum of comfort, they are in a better place to receive jarring and frightening information. And I think when people come in prepared, I don't think that content warnings necessarily dissuade people from picking up books. I think that, trauma doesn't necessarily have to be a jump scare. I think you don't have to, I think it's just a way for people to step into the pool instead of cannonballing.
So, now I'm thinking about authors who might sort of self-censor. I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about in some ways. If you're writing something and you want to, you want to make sure it gets sold, or you want to have a wide audience, and you're thinking how, what's the best way to do that? What's the best way, So maybe that's part of where the happily ever after comes from, the HEA ending, because it's kind of, there's a lot of it out there. Just saying, a lot of books with happily ever after endings, and a lot of people, in fact, writing several books a year with happily ever after endings, which I find it kind of amazing, considering that my book was published in 2015, and wow, it's 10 years now. So anyway, that's a side point. Trying to think, but I mean, this is actually, I'm wondering if anybody in the audience has any questions that they want to ask. Does anybody have any questions? Gotham, what do I do? Greg, do I hold it? Can you stand up?
You can probably hear.
All right, this is to everybody, but actually mostly to Cheryl, who, like me, writes
crime
crime fiction. And we can talk about AGA until we turn blue, but Cheryl and I are of a mind, we can't write romance. One of the things that I would like Cheryl to address in terms of writing crime fiction, which none of this particular point hasn't been brought up by the panel at all, is the idea of thrill, and what part thrill and adventure and daring and plays in your writing of crime fiction. And why it's important, say, for the second,
Yeah.
Or the whole LGBTQ community to have that sense of thrill.
I think I'm not a good thriller writer. There's some people who are really great thriller writers. I think you do a really fine job of distinguishing your crime fiction by being in the thriller lane, where you're building up a lot of suspense. There's a clock ticking, it's, when you think of thrillers, you think of there's a really bad thing about to happen, and the protagonist has just a little bit of time to save the world, and that
Well,
kind of.
I'm thinking more the thrill of, say, of Charlie Mack, who might have to your door.
Yeah.
Of going through this dangerous world, and how, as a queer person, she faces this dangerous world, as opposed to the thriller.
I see.
and
Oh, okay.
genre.
I'm sorry, I misinterpreted that. Well, here's the difference between your brilliant Cantor Gold character and my
Questions for you.
my Charlie Mack character is, Charlie's a black woman, and so I have a conceit about black women being natural born detectives. I think that we're always sussing out the clues, looking, seeing the live and when people are talking, reading between the lines and that kind of thing. And I think this is interesting to me, because I think it's happening now, that there are lots of black folks right now who are kind of very outraged by what's happening in the world, but kind of sitting in the cut right now. The white folks are out there at Bryant Park, and they're going like, go get them, white people,
It's your turn.
It's your turn. It's like, it's like when Trump won the first time, I had so many despairing calls from white people that I know going like, oh, what are we gonna do? I'm going like, we'll get through it. Because I think black folks have been through slavery, desegregation, lynchings and stuff like that. And so we have a certain threshold of terror that we understand better than others. And so for Charlie, you know, she's always psychologically, she's always a couple of steps removed from that. I don't know if you noticed that about her, that she's not emotionally evolved. And she's getting better, you know, but I use the other players of the book to help her get there. And Mandy, her newfound love, is helping her to get there. So, you know, I think that's the difference in my books around the thing about thrill, as relative to your books, which, you know, are filled with these wonderful passages of fighting and stuff. I love that stuff. So I hope that answers your question, Ann.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you, Cheryl.
You got a question? You did.
Somebody have a question?
Somebody else raised.
This is a really specific question, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
The cover of the book, like, it is gorgeous, it is stunning, it is definitely what drew my eye to it when it was on that galley. But I'm not sure how, like, why does she look so different from the photographs in the book? Like,
We should ask the cover designer.
It is gorgeous, it is stunning, it is an absolutely amazing job, I was just always kind of have wondered things. Yes.
Yeah.
This is actually a question for Anne McMahon.
It is honestly one of the most
You
beautiful
wanted
books
her
I've
to
ever
look,
seen.
you wanted her to look like the
No, I was just curious.
No, well, I was a moment of mortification, so I kind of glazed over during your questions, so.
I'm sorry.
The
No,
question
that's-
is, why doesn't she look like one of the characters in the book?
Because then I'd have to read the book.
Okay.
Not
That's not
kidding,
true.
I'm absolutely, I totally read the book. Because what I try to do when I do a cover is I try to do, rather than something that's a literal representation of like a person or a thing or an event in the story, I try to do something that's more evocative of the whole tone of the book. And that's really what I tried to evoke there by picking her and using that cracked canvas, you know, background to try to suggest longevity, and then the really, really tiny little trickle of blood to sort of hint at something. So it was never intended to be a literal representation of any, but I'm glad you liked it.
Yeah.
a great
Like,
question.
whenever I show people the cover, like on the internet, they're always like, it's stunning, who is it? I'm like, not a character in the book, but yes.
So I'd be really happy if going forward from this day, you just stop with "it's really stunning." Just between us. Particularly when I'm sitting here next to the
Did the
author.
cover,
I love
did
the
the
cover.
cover, did
I
the
can
cover
tell
make
you-
you pick a book?
Did the
pick up
cover
book?
make you pick the book
Yeah.
up?
1000% yes.
See?
There you go.
One
There
number
you go.
6, there you go.
There you go.
Thank you, though, that's a very good question.
And good answer.
I loved it.
I would just have to say on some, not Bywater books, some books that I've seen that are romances are certainly, to me, don't look anything like the characters that are in the book, because they're wearing heels that are about the height of that,
Or they have the fingernails, or the, you
yeah,
know,
and very, very tight skirts that you probably could not run down a dirt road in, and, you know, so I can see, like, yeah, covers don't always entirely really meet up with what's inside the book. But that was a very good point, by the way. Does anybody else have any questions while I'm sitting here thinking what to say? Cool. And by the way, the woman who asked the question before, that's Ann Aptaker,
And Aptaker.
and her Cantor Gold series is published by Bywater. And a shout out.
Best publisher
Yes,
We
yeah.
think so.
and I know because I've been around other publishers, so I'm telling you, it's the best publisher in the field.
Nice, nice.
Oh, we've got a question from the person in the back.
Yay! Oh,
I'm wondering what everybody's next book is about, if they're.
Oh, good.
But
Let's-
I know if you want to keep it close to your chest.
I can't even keep my bra close to my chest.
Thank you, beautiful stranger. My next book is a Victorian ghost story. It's about a spiritualist, a huckster, a faker, There was a moment in time in America and in Britain where people would pretend to do seances, and it was a huge thing. And this person is a faker, and she accidentally brings back the ghost of her first love and best friend who's been dead for 10 years. And hijinks ensue.
Oh, that sounds
Great. Anna Burke.
Anna Burke, right.
I apologize ahead of time. So
You're like Mr. Collins in Pride and Prejudice. You lead with an apology.
these are excellent potatoes. Well, I have ADHD, and so I'm usually working on several books at once. So currently, I am heavily drafting the last Seal Cove book, which is going, I had about 40,000 words, and then I realized nothing was working, and so I hit delete. So now I'm on draft 2. And I've been plotting the last Compass Rose book. I'm a little bit way into the sequel to In the Roses of Pieria. And there are some other projects that I guess I think I'm not publicly talking about right now because they may die in the water. But yeah, there's like, I've got 5 or 6 Scrivener documents open at once on my computer. My wife looks at my screen and twitches. She says, "How can you live?" And I don't know how you couldn't live like that. I need all my little playgrounds, So yeah, that's my long-winded working on everything at once.
I believe, Anna, you have a book coming out very soon?
Yes, your new release.
Do you want to talk
Tell us
about
which
that?
of the 5. I had a friend years ago, I think this is the Anna Burke School of, authorship. She had trouble paying her bills, so the first of every month, she would put them all on the Lazy Susan and give it a spin, and the ones that stayed on got paid.
That's very, very, very accurate. Yeah, so I'm actually really nervous about my upcoming book. It's called Windless, and Windless? Ooh. I need to stop writing books with covers with titles that I don't pronounce well. This is a consistent issue that I have.
The
Yeah.
sailing term.
The sailing term, yes. Although I was talking to Melina Mackay and she said, you might want to not choose that. All I can see is the word ass. And I was like,
Well, that tells you everything about Melina Mackay, doesn't it?
Exactly. It's the 3rd book in the Seal Cove romance, and it's about, Stevie and Angie, who have been pining like really annoyingly over each other for 2 books at this point. But we also get to see kind of why Angie is the way that she is. And so it does, it's my spiciest book, but it's extra spicy because that's how Angie has learned to deal with trauma. So I both enjoyed that, and I also, when I think about it being published and some of the things that I wrote in it, part of me does want to crawl under the nearest, yeah, it's very spicy.
Well, and ironically, the covers shows Angie, the protagonist of the book, and she looks exactly like the main character in A Long Time Dead. That was a joke. Oh,
What are you working
me?
on?
Oh, well, I'm actually writing it's a romantic comedy about the polio epidemic of 1952. It's that part's true, it's not a romantic comedy. As hard as I try to infuse it with levity, it just, 2 women in iron lungs trying to, not working out. But, no, it's a historical novel about, about life in a post-war world and the onset of that epidemic, which is remarkably like COVID. It happened in exactly the same way, and people lived with the same amount of fear and misinformation. So that's what I'm working on.
And now polio's coming back, so it's going to be extra.
And can I just say that I had planned to write this book before we were even thinking about RFK Jr. Truly. So That's the next. Oh, I'm sorry, and I do have a gosh, really, Clouseau? I do have a romantic comedy coming out in July called Switch.
Yes, yay.
That's a lot of fun, and it's all about tropes. It's all about tropes. A woman goes on about 13 abysmal first dates, and each one is a different trope in lesbian romance. So.
I like that. I'm writing a Western. I like Westerns. I've always loved, I grew up watching Westerns with my dad, and I've been challenged to do a Western. So I have one that has set in 1870, Oklahoma and Kansas. And I'm fascinated by that period of time. And
You could drop in on Helen.
no, Helen?
Your woman in Iowa.
Oh, no, oh, yes. I'm fascinated by that time because there's so much going on post-Civil War. They're trying to build the country. The railroads are expanding west. The carpetbaggers are taking over in the west. Washington, as Ulysses S. Grant, he's kind of fucking up, but he's also doing some good things, you know? The country's in turmoil, and I'm interested in that. They're trying to figure out what to do with free black people. Free black people are trying to figure out what to do with themselves. Native Americans are still getting their land robbed. And so I have said it in that period because I'm fascinated by the policies that are coming out at that time. And the protagonist is a black Pinkerton detective who works with a black Secret Service agent. They had just started the Secret Service when the assassination of Abraham Lincoln took place. They started off looking for counterfeiters and not protecting the presidents, but now they're protecting presidents. And so my Pinkerton is investigating a bank robbery, and it turns out that bank robbery is something much, much bigger.
This sounds great. Okay, Valkyrie, let's hear it.
Oh, well, as many of you know, I mean, basically I'm working right now, the thing that I'm really working on is a memoir about my mom, who had dementia, and so it's a memoir about my caregiving. And working title is something like Mapping a Country I've Never Been to, One Daughter's Journey Through Her Mother's Dementia. I think that's the kind of thing. And I do have a novel that has been stewing for a while. Is that a good word? Anyway, it's called
I think it's congealed at this point.
I'm afraid you're right. It's called Table for One, and the whole thing is set in the extremely quiet village of Little Musings, which is a village designed especially for introverts. And so there's all kinds of rules about where you can talk and where you can't. And there's a little bed and breakfast called the Shrinking Violet, and there's 4 guests in the bed and breakfast, and so they all have stories. And one of them is a poet who's being haunted by the ghost of Emily Dickinson. And I gotta tell you, it's the weirdest thing. I was never like an Emily Dickinson scholar or anything. I mean, I kind of knew who she was, but she just showed up in my head one day. And every once in a while, like, she'll just say things, and I'll be like, okay, this is really weird. But anyway, that's my, why are you looking at me like that, man?
Does somebody have her keys? The Belle of Amherst.
So those are my unfinished projects. And I wanted to just say, Samara, because when you were talking about the book you're working on now, I suddenly thought of Sarah Waters.
Yes. Love Sarah Waters.
Was it Affinity? Was that the one?
Affinity is her, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a bleak one.
It's a good one.
Yeah, that was a great one, but it reminded me very much of that movie.
Yeah, I love Sarah Waters.
So that sounds really great. Any other questions from our audience? Because I have no idea of time, because I'm not watching.
What time is it?
Oh, so we're early. But that gives you time to buy books and have them signed, right? So thank you all for being here.
Thank you all so much. This was a delight. And yes, we have books by the authors up front or in the back, depending on how you view this room. And our authors would be happy to sign for you. Don't worry about the chairs, Donnie and I will take care of that, and Mikey will sell you books.
Is there crudité?
There's no crudité,
What the
unless
hell?
anyone brought one.
Anybody bring crudité?
All right,
Thank
bye
you.
online viewers, bye